The darkness over Afghanistan's Kunar province was shattered by the distinctive thump-thump of rotor blades cutting through the thin mountain air. Captain Sarah Phoenix Martinez banked her H-64 Apache helicopter hard to the left, her night vision goggles painting the rugged landscape below in an eerie green glow. 3 months into her deployment at Forward Operating Base Chapman, she had become something of a legend among both American forces and Taliban fighters alike. Phoenix, this is Overwatch. We've got multiple heat signatures moving toward Grid 41 SMB, 12,345. Looks like a coordinated attack on Outpost Bravo, crackled the voice of Major Lisa Chun through Sarah's headset. The intelligence officer's tone carried the urgency that had become all too familiar in this remote corner of the Hindu Kush Mountains. Sarah's gloved hands moved with practiced precision across the Apache's complex control systems. Copy that, Overwatch. Phoenix is inbound. 8 to 3 minutes. She glanced at her co-pilot and gunner, Warrant Officer Jake Bulldog Williams, whose fingers were already dancing across the targeting systems in the front seat below her. After dozens of missions together, they moved like a single organism, each anticipating the other's next move. The outpost came into view through the thermal imaging display, a small cluster of reinforced buildings and sandbags perched on a strategic hilltop that controlled access to a vital supply route. Bright flashes of muzzle fire lit up the surrounding ridge lines like deadly fireflies, and Sarah could see the distinctive heat signatures of at least 20 insurgents closing in on the American position from 3 directions. Bulldog, you seeing this? Sarah's voice remained calm, despite the chaos unfolding below. It was a tone that had earned her the respect of every soldier who had ever called for her support. No matter how desperate the situation, Phoenix never sounded rattled. Roger that, Phoenix. I count 2 machine gun positions on the eastern ridge, and what looks like an RPG team moving up the south face. Williams replied, his Texas drawl somehow managing to make the life-and-death tactical assessment sound almost casual. Permission to light them up? Sarah brought the Apache into a steep diving attack, the powerful engines screaming as she pushed the aircraft to its limits. This was what she lived for. The moment when American soldiers pinned down by enemy fire would hear the sound of salvation approaching from the sky. Light them up, Bulldog. Let's show these guys why they call us the Angel of Death. The 30 millimeters. 230 chain gun beneath the Apache's nose began its deadly chatter, spitting armor-piercing rounds at 625 rounds per minute. Each tracer round left a streak of light that connected the helicopter to its targets like the finger of an angry god. The eastern machine gun position simply ceased to exist, vaporized in a spray of rock and metal fragments. But as Sarah pulled out of her attack run and began to circle for another pass, something unusual caught her attention through the night vision system. Instead of scattering like ants from a disturbed hill, the typical Taliban response to Apache fire, several of the insurgents were holding their positions. More troubling, she could see the distinctive rectangular glow of electronic devices pointed in her direction. Bulldog, you seeing this? Eastern slope, about 200 meters from where that machine gun was positioned, Sarah called out, her voice carrying a note of concern that her gunner immediately picked up on. Williams adjusted his targeting system to focus on the area. Sarah had indicated, "Holy shit, Phoenix, they're filming us." That's definitely a night vision camera, maybe even thermal imaging equipment. The revelation sent a chill down both aviators' spines. In their experience, Taliban fighters were more concerned with survival than documentation during firefights. Sarah lined up for another attack run, this time targeting the RPG team that was preparing to engage the outpost's main defensive position. As her Hellfire missile streaked toward the target, she noticed more electronic signatures scattered across the battlefield. Overwatch, this is Phoenix. We've got multiple insurgents using electronic devices to record our attack patterns. This isn't just another raid. They're studying us. The Hellfire missile found its mark with devastating precision, eliminating the RPG threat in a flash of orange flame that briefly turned night into day. But instead of celebrating the successful engagement, Sarah found herself analyzing every move she had made during the attack. Had she been predictable in her approach? Were there patterns in her tactics that enemy forces could exploit? Phoenix, Outpost Bravo reports all clear. Outstanding work out there, came the grateful voice of the outpost commander over the radio. You guys just saved our asses once again. As Sarah banked the Apache toward home base, she couldn't shake the image of those insurgents, calmly recording her attack while their comrades died around them. In 3 months of combat operations, she had destroyed countless Taliban positions, eliminated dozens of high-value targets, and saved the lives of American soldiers too many times to count. Her call sign, Phoenix, had become synonymous with salvation among ground troops and death among enemy fighters. But tonight felt different. Tonight, she had the distinct impression that while she had been hunting the Taliban, they had simultaneously been hunting her. The thought that her own tactical superiority might be turned against her was deeply unsettling. Every pilot knew that predictability in combat was a death sentence, yet establishing effective tactical patterns was essential for mission success. As the lights of Forward Operating Base Chapman appeared on the horizon, Sarah made a mental note to discuss her concerns with Major Chun during the post-mission debrief. Something was changing in the nature of the conflict, and she had a growing suspicion that she was about to become the primary target in a deadly game of cat and mouse. The Taliban weren't just learning to survive her attacks anymore. They were learning to hunt her. The intelligence briefing room at Forward Operating Base Chapman was a cramped, windowless space that smelled of stale coffee and the metallic tang of electronic equipment running 24 hours a day. Major Lisa Chun sat hunched over her desk, surrounded by towers of translated documents, satellite imagery, and intercepted radio communications that painted a disturbing picture of enemy activity in the region. Sarah entered the briefing room still wearing her flight suit, the fabric still damp with sweat from her latest mission. She had barely had time to shut down her Apache systems before Chun's urgent message reached her. We need to talk. Now. Sit down, Phoenix, Chun said without looking up from the documents spread across her desk. Her usually composed demeanor showed cracks of concern that immediately put Sarah on edge. In 3 months of working together, Sarah had never seen. The intelligence officer looked genuinely worried. What's got you spooked, Major? Sarah asked, settling into the uncomfortable metal chair across from Chun's desk. Through the thin walls, she could hear the constant hum of the base's operations center, where duty officers tracked friendly and enemy movements across the province around the clock. Chun finally looked up, her dark eyes reflecting the exhaustion that came from weeks of analyzing increasingly troubling intelligence reports. How much do you know about Taliban operational intelligence capabilities? Sarah shrugged. I know they're not the backwards mountain fighters some people think they are. They use cell phones, coordinate attacks, adapt their tactics. Why? Because they've been studying you, Phoenix. Not just watching your missions, actively analyzing your combat patterns with a level of sophistication that's frankly terrifying. Chun pulled out a thick folder marked with red classification stamps and opened it to reveal dozens of intercepted communications transcripts. The first document made Sarah's blood run cold. Written in English translation from intercepted Pashto communications, it read, the female pilot favors left-hand attack patterns when engaging multiple targets. She consistently approaches from the northeast when supporting convoy operations. Her response time to emergency calls averages 4.2 minutes from Forward Operating Base Chapman. Jesus Christ, Sarah whispered, reading over the tactical assessment. that laid out her preferences with clinical precision. How long have they been collecting this? At least 6 weeks, maybe longer. Look at this one. Chun slid another document across the desk. This intercept was more detailed, describing Sarah's tendency to fly low during medical evacuations, to minimize the time wounded soldiers were exposed to enemy fire. It even noted her habit of using specific radio frequencies during high-stress situations. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the implications. They're not just tracking my missions. They're building a playbook on how to kill me. Chun nodded grimly. Our signals intelligence teams have identified at least 3 separate Taliban cells that are sharing information specifically about your operations. They've designated you as what they call a high-value air target and assigned resources specifically to developing countermeasures against your tactics. The next document in the folder contained detailed sketches of Apache helicopter attack, profiles, annotated in Arabic script with notes about vulnerable approach angles and optimal firing solutions for surface-to-air missiles. Sarah recognized her own tactical preferences, mapped out like a textbook example of how not to fly in contested airspace. There's more, Chun continued, pulling out a series of photographs taken with telephoto lenses. The images showed Sarah's Apache during various missions over the past month, captured from multiple angles that suggested a coordinated surveillance effort. They've been photographing your aircraft, documenting your weapon configurations, even timing your rotor blade. Signatures for acoustic identification. Sarah studied the photographs with growing alarm. In one image, her Apache was clearly visible during a night mission, illuminated by the thermal signature of her own engine exhaust. The quality of the photography suggested professional grade. Night vision equipment far beyond what typical Taliban fighters possessed. Who's funding this level of intelligence gathering? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. That's the million-dollar question. The equipment they're using, the coordination between cells, the analytical sophistication. This isn't being run by local commanders. Someone with serious resources and professional intelligence training is coordinating this operation. Chun pulled out the most disturbing document yet, a detailed map of the province, marked with Sarah's flight routes over the past month. Red X marks indicated locations where enemy forces had attempted to engage her Apache, while blue circles showed successful attack locations. The pattern revealed a learning curve that was rapidly improving the enemy's ability to predict her movements. They know your call sign, Phoenix. They know your voice patterns. Hell, they've even noted that you tend to laugh over the radio before executing particularly dangerous attack runs. Chun pointed to a highlighted section of one transcript that made Sarah's stomach lurch. They think your laughter is a weakness, a tell that indicates when you're about to attempt something risky. Sarah felt the weight of being hunted settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Every mission she had flown, every life she had saved, every tactical decision she had made was being analyzed by an enemy that was learning to kill her with scientific precision. What's our response? Sarah asked, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the implications of everything she was seeing. Chun leaned back in her chair, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across her face. That's what we need to figure out. We can ground you, reassign you to a different operational area, or we use their intelligence gathering against them, Sarah interrupted, her mind already working through the tactical possibilities. If they think they know my patterns, maybe it's time to give them patterns they don't expect. The two women sat in silence for a moment, both understanding that they were discussing a deadly game of chess where the stakes were measured in American lives. Outside, another Apache was spinning up for a night mission, its rotors building to the familiar rhythm that had become the soundtrack of the war. There's something else, Chun said quietly. Intelligence suggests they're not just planning to shoot you down. They want to capture you alive. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice as the full implications of her situation became clear. She wasn't just being hunted. She was being specifically targeted for capture by an enemy that had spent weeks learning everything about how she fought, how she flew, and how she could be trapped. High in the mountains of Pakistan's tribal regions, 40 kilometers from the Afghan border, Taliban commander Malik Hassan sat in the dim glow of sophisticated radio equipment that would have impressed intelligence officers in most modern armies. The cave complex that served as his operational headquarters had been carved deeper into the mountainside over the past 6 months, creating a network of interconnected chambers that housed everything from weapon storage to an advanced communications center. Hassan was not the typical Taliban field commander that American forces had grown accustomed to fighting. Educated at Kabul University before the Soviet invasion, he had spent 2 decades learning the art of asymmetric warfare from Pakistani EC handlers and Arab Mujahideen veterans. His scarred face bore witness to 30 years of continuous conflict, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence of a man who understood that modern warfare was won through information as much as firepower. The radio equipment surrounding him represented months of careful acquisition through smuggling networks that stretched from Karachi to Tehran. Chinese-made frequency scanners capable of intercepting encrypted military communications sat beside Iranian signal processing equipment and Russian electronic warfare systems. The combination gave Hassan capabilities that most American commanders would have assumed impossible for a guerrilla organization operating from mountain caves. "Commander, we have her voice again," announced his communications specialist, a young Pakistani engineer named Farid, who had been recruited from Islamabad's Technical University. The young man adjusted his headset and pointed to the glowing displays that showed American helicopter frequencies across the Kunar province. Hassan moved to the communication station, his weathered hands settling on the sophisticated equipment with surprising gentleness. For 3 weeks, he had been personally monitoring American aviation frequencies, learning to distinguish individual pilots by their voice patterns, tactical preferences, and communication styles. But one voice had become his obsession: the female Apache pilot they called Phoenix. "Phoenix, this is Overwatch. We have troops in contact at grid 41 SMB 67,890. Multiple casualties. Urgent medevac required," crackled through the speakers in the cave, the signal intercepted from American tactical frequencies 40 kilometers away. Hassan listened intently as the female pilot's response came through clearly. "Copy that, Overwatch. Phoenix is inbound. ETA, 5 minutes. Bulldog, prep the 30 millimeters for suppression fire on the northern ridgeline." "There," Hassan said softly in Pashto, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a hunter who had found his prey's trail. "Listen to her voice. She is calm, confident, but there is something else." Farid adjusted the audio filters, cleaning up the signal quality until Phoenix's voice came through with crystal clarity. As they listened to her coordinating the rescue mission, Hassan's trained ear picked up subtle audio cues that most listeners would miss entirely. "She laughs," Hassan continued, his scarred face illuminating in the green glow of the radio displays. "Not loudly, but it is there. A small sound of amusement before she commits to the most dangerous parts of her attacks. It is her weakness. This American confidence that makes her predictable." Over the past month, Hassan had documented 37 separate engagements involving the Phoenix pilot. His men had been killed by her Hellfire missiles in locations spanning 3 provinces, and each encounter had been carefully analyzed for tactical intelligence. The pattern that emerged was both impressive and exploitable. Phoenix was extraordinarily skilled, but her skills followed recognizable patterns. "Play back the recording from last Tuesday's convoy escort," Hassan instructed, settling into a chair, that had been positioned to give him optimal access to all the communication equipment. Farid's fingers moved across digital controls that would have been at home in any modern intelligence facility. The recorded conversation filled the cave as they listened to Phoenix coordinating a complex rescue operation that had saved 12 American soldiers from a carefully planned Taliban ambush. "There, do you hear it?" Hassan pointed to a specific moment in the recording. She laughs just before she announces her intention to engage multiple targets simultaneously. It is not conscious. She does not realize she is broadcasting her tactical intentions to anyone listening. The cave fell silent, except for the hum of electronic equipment and the distant sound of wind through the mountain passes. Hassan studied the tactical maps spread across a makeshift table, each one marked with Phoenix's documented flight patterns, response times, and engagement preferences. The intelligence picture they had assembled was more complete than most military units possessed about their own operations. "Commander, we have intercepted American planning communications," announced another of Hassan's specialists, a former Afghan Army signals officer who had defected 6 months earlier. "They are aware that we are monitoring their frequencies, but they do not know the extent of our capabilities." Hassan nodded, unsurprised by the development. American forces had sophisticated counterintelligence capabilities, but they consistently underestimated the technical sophistication of their enemies. The assumption that Taliban forces were limited to improvised explosive devices and small arms fire had cost them dearly throughout the conflict. "What are they saying about our Phoenix?" Hassan asked, using the possessive term that his men had adopted when referring to their primary target. "Intelligence reports suggest they suspect communication intercepts, but they believe we are using simple scanner equipment. They do not know that we have full spectrum analysis capabilities, or that we have been building individual pilot profiles." Hassan smiled, an expression that failed to reach his eyes. The Americans' technological superiority had made them overconfident in their communication security. They broadcast tactical information with the assumption that Taliban forces lacked the equipment to intercept and analyze their signals properly. "Excellent. Continue monitoring all aviation frequencies, but focus specifically on our Phoenix. I want to know her voice better than she knows it herself." Hassan stood and moved to the cave entrance, looking out over the moonlit valley that stretched toward the Afghan border. 37 of his fighters had died because of the female pilot's precision and skill. Each death had been carefully documented, analyzed, and added to the intelligence file that would eventually be used to plan her capture. The American military's practice of using female pilots in combat operations had initially been dismissed by Taliban commanders as a propaganda stunt, but Phoenix had proven that assumption dangerously wrong. "Sir, she is speaking again," Farid called out, adjusting his headset to better capture the signal. Hassan returned to the communication station, settling back into his monitoring position. As Phoenix's voice filled the cave once more, coordinating another life-or-death rescue mission, Hassan closed his eyes and listened with the concentration of a musician learning a complex piece of music. Soon, very soon, he would know her voice well enough to predict her every tactical decision before she made it herself. The RPG-7 rocket-propelled grenade screamed past Sarah's Apache cockpit with less than 10 feet to spare, close enough that she could see the distinctive fins of the warhead through her side window. The shock wave from its passage rattled the helicopter's armored hull like a giant's fist, sending vibrations through the flight controls that she felt in her bones. "Holy shit!" Warrant Officer Williams shouted from the gunner's seat below, his voice tight with adrenaline. "That was way too close, Phoenix. They had our exact altitude dialed in." Sarah banked hard to the right, pulling the Apache into a steep climbing turn that pushed both crew members deep into their seats as G-forces built. Below them, Muzzle flashes erupted from positions that should have been empty according to their pre-mission intelligence briefing. This was supposed to be a routine convoy escort to a relatively secure section of the Kunar Valley. But the Taliban fighters waiting in ambush had been positioned with surgical precision. Bulldog, light, up that ridge line. 30 Mike, danger close, Sarah commanded, bringing the Apache around for a retaliatory attack. The 30mm chain gun beneath the helicopter's nose began its deadly chatter, sending armor-piercing rounds into the rocky positions where enemy fighters had revealed themselves. But even as she watched her rounds impact on target, Sarah's mind was racing through the tactical implications of what had just happened. The RPG team hadn't fired a hasty shot at a target of opportunity. They had been waiting in exactly the right position, at exactly the right altitude, with exactly the right timing to intercept her flight path. Someone had predicted her route with disturbing accuracy. Phoenix, this is Convoy Alpha 7. Thanks for the assist, but we're taking effective fire from multiple positions. These guys knew exactly when and where we'd be, crackled the voice of the convoy commander over the tactical radio network. Sarah's Apache circled the ambush site like an angry wasp, her thermal imaging systems revealing the heat signatures of Taliban fighters scattered across terrain that intelligence reports had declared clear just 6 hours earlier. As she prepared for another gun run, her radio crackled with an intercepted enemy transmission that made her blood run cold. The Laughing Ghost approaches from the northeast, altitude 500 meters. RPG teams, adjust fire for standard attack pattern, came a voice speaking accented English over what should have been a secure Taliban frequency. Sarah's hands momentarily froze on the controls. The enemy wasn't just lying in ambush. They were actively tracking her movements in real time and communicating in English to ensure their intercepted transmissions would be understood by American forces. It was psychological warfare designed to let her know she was being hunted. Overwatch, this is Phoenix, Sarah radioed back to the base operations center, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. We've got a serious problem out here. Enemy forces are predicting our tactical responses with precision that suggests comprehensive intelligence gathering. Major Chun's voice came back immediately, tight with concern. Phoenix, we're seeing the same patterns across multiple missions this week. Return to base immediately for emergency briefing. The flight back to forward operating base Chapman felt longer than usual, with Sarah constantly scanning the horizon for the telltale smoke trails of surface-to-air missiles. The enemy's ability to predict her movements had transformed what should have been a routine mission into a deadly game of aerial chess, where her opponent seemed to know her next move before she made it. 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself back in the cramped intelligence briefing room, still wearing her sweat-soaked flight suit. Major Chun had spread a new collection of documents across her desk, each one representing another piece of an increasingly disturbing puzzle. It's gotten worse, Phoenix. Much worse. Chun began without preamble. In the past 72 hours, we've intercepted communications indicating that Taliban forces are sharing real-time intelligence about your missions across multiple cells throughout the province. The first document Chun showed her was a transcript of intercepted radio communications from just 6 hours earlier. Phoenix departed Chapman at 0847 hours, bearing northeast toward Convoy Alpha 7. Estimate arrival, Grid 41 SMB 45,678 at 0903 hours. All units prepare for standard left-hand attack pattern. Sarah stared at the transcript in disbelief. They knew my departure time, my destination, and my tactical preferences before I even reached the target area. How is that possible? We think they have spotters positioned around the base perimeter, probably equipped with long-range optics and satellite communication equipment. Every time you take off, they're tracking your flight path and transmitting that information to forward positions. Chun pulled out a map marked with red circles indicating suspected observation posts. But that's not the worst part. The next document made Sarah's stomach lurch. It was a detailed analysis of her flight patterns over the past month, written in English and formatted like a professional intelligence assessment. The document included precise measurements of her preferred attack altitudes, her standard approach vectors for different types of missions, and even timing analysis of her decision-making processes during combat. Someone with serious analytical capabilities is coordinating this intelligence operation, Chun continued. The level of detail suggests they have access to professional intelligence training and sophisticated analysis software. This isn't being run by typical Taliban field commanders. Sarah studied a section of the report that analyzed her communication patterns, noting that she tended to use specific radio frequencies during high-stress situations, and that her voice patterns indicated tactical intentions before she executed them. The clinical precision of the analysis was deeply unsettling. "There's more," Chun said, pulling out photographs that had clearly been taken with high-powered telephoto lenses. The images showed Sarah's Apache during various missions, captured from multiple angles that suggested a coordinated surveillance network. Some of the photographs had been taken from positions that required sophisticated infiltration techniques to access. "Look at this one." Sean pointed to a photograph that showed Sarah's helicopter during a night mission, illuminated by thermal imaging equipment. "This was taken 3 days ago during your medical evacuation mission in the Peck Valley. The quality suggests military-grade night vision systems." Sarah felt the walls of the briefing room closing in around her as the full scope of the surveillance operation became clear. Every mission she had flown, every tactical decision she had made, every life she had saved was being documented and analyzed by an enemy that was learning to kill her with scientific precision. "They're not just tracking me," Sarah said quietly. The realization hitting her like a physical blow. "They're building a comprehensive profile of how I think, how I fight, how I can be trapped." Chun nodded grimly. "And according to our latest intercepts, they're almost ready to use that information against you. Intelligence suggests they're planning something big, a coordinated operation specifically designed to exploit everything they've learned about your tactical preferences." Outside the briefing room, another Apache was spinning up for an evening mission, its rotor blades building to the familiar rhythm that had once been comforting but now sounded ominous. Sarah realized that every sound her helicopter made, every radio transmission she sent, every tactical decision she executed was being monitored by an enemy that knew her better than she knew herself. The jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush cast long shadows across Dead Man's Canyon as the first light of dawn crept across the Afghan landscape. Taliban commander Malik Hassan stood on a rocky outcrop 300 meters above the narrow valley floor, surveying his masterpiece of destruction with the cold satisfaction of a chess master positioning pieces for checkmate. After weeks of meticulous planning and intelligence gathering, everything was finally in place for the trap that would end the Phoenix pilot's reign of terror over his forces. Below him, the canyon stretched for nearly 2 kilometers in a gentle S-curve that would force any incoming aircraft to fly a predictable flight path with limited maneuvering options. The valley walls rose steeply on both sides, creating a natural funnel that would channel the American helicopter directly into his carefully prepared kill zone. Hassan had chosen this location after analyzing months of Phoenix's flight data, identifying it as the perfect combination of tactical necessity and strategic vulnerability. "Commander, the last of the SA-7 missiles are in position," reported his lieutenant, Rashid, a former Afghan army officer who had brought valuable technical expertise to Hassan's operation when he defected 18 months earlier. "We have overlapping fields of fire covering every possible approach vector. Hassan nodded without taking his eyes off the valley below. Hidden among the rocks and sparse vegetation were 8 separate firing positions, each carefully camouflaged and positioned to provide multiple layers of anti-aircraft coverage. 2 Soviet-era A-7 surface-to-air missile systems occupied the high ground at either end of the canyon, while 6 RPG-7 teams had been positioned at staggered intervals along both ridge lines to create a gauntlet of overlapping fire zones. The positioning had taken his men 3 days to complete, working only at night to avoid American surveillance satellites and drone reconnaissance. Each firing position had been surveyed with military precision, with range cards prepared for multiple target scenarios and backup positions identified in case of counterattack. Hassan's engineering background had proven invaluable in calculating optimal firing solutions for targets moving at various altitudes and speeds. "Show me the communication intercept equipment," Hassan commanded, following Rashid down a narrow path to a concealed cave that housed their mobile signals intelligence center. Inside the cave, Hassan's communications specialist Farid was hunched over the sophisticated radio equipment that had been carefully positioned to maintain line-of-sight communication with Taliban forces throughout the province. Multiple antennas extended through carefully camouflaged openings in the cave roof, providing the capability to monitor American tactical frequencies while coordinating Hassan's own forces. "We have continuous monitoring of all aviation frequencies from Forward Operating Base Chapman," Farid reported, adjusting the frequency scanners to optimize signal quality. "Phoenix has maintained a consistent pattern of responding to convoy distress calls within 4.2 minutes of initial transmission. Her approach vector from Chapman to this location will bring her directly through the center of our kill zone." Hassan studied the topographical maps spread across an improvised table, each one marked with Phoenix's documented flight patterns over the past 6 weeks. The intelligence picture they had assembled was more comprehensive than most military units possessed about their own operations. Every tactical preference, every communication protocol, every behavioral pattern had been carefully documented and analyzed. "The beauty of this operation," Hassan explained to his assembled fighters, switching to Pashto for their benefit, "is that the American pilot's greatest strength will become her fatal weakness. Her dedication to rescuing American soldiers will compel her to respond immediately to our false distress call, and her tactical predictability will bring her directly into our trap." The false convoy that would serve as bait was already in position at the far end of the canyon, consisting of 3 disabled vehicles positioned to simulate a Taliban ambush in progress. Hassan's men had spent hours creating realistic battle damage and preparing pyrotechnic devices that would simulate an ongoing firefight when viewed through American thermal imaging systems. "Mahmoud, status report on the deception operation." Hassan called to a grizzled fighter who had been coordinating the false convoy setup. "All vehicles are in position, Commander. We have smoke generators prepared to simulate battle damage, and our men are ready to provide realistic small arms. Fire when the American reconnaissance drones arrive. The scene will appear authentic under both visual and thermal surveillance." Hassan allowed himself a moment of professional pride as he considered the complexity of the operation they had planned. Unlike the improvised ambushes that characterized most Taliban operations, this trap incorporated sophisticated deception, coordinated timing, and multiple redundant systems designed to ensure mission success even if individual components failed. The key to the entire operation was psychological manipulation. Hassan's intelligence analysis had revealed that Phoenix responded most aggressively to situations where American soldiers were in immediate mortal danger. The distress call they had prepared would indicate wounded personnel requiring urgent medical evacuation, a scenario that would compel the pilot to take risks she might otherwise avoid. "Commander, we have prepared the radio transmission that will initiate the operation," announced another of his fighters, holding up a handheld radio configured to broadcast on American emergency frequencies. The message includes proper authentication, codes and tactical terminology that will appear genuine to American operators. Hassan examined the carefully scripted distress call that his men had prepared based on months of monitoring American tactical communications. The message incorporated authentic radio procedures, proper grid coordinates, and emergency medical terminology that would convince American forces they were responding to a legitimate crisis. Excellent. Remember, timing is critical to this. Operation success. The distress call must be transmitted at exactly 0630 hours, when Phoenix is scheduled to begin her morning flight operations. Our intelligence indicates she maintains consistent patterns during her pre-flight preparation, which will give us precise timing for her arrival in the kill zone. As Hassan made final preparations for the operation, he reflected on the months of patient intelligence gathering that had made this moment possible. Every Phoenix mission they had observed, every tactical pattern they had documented, every behavioral quirk they had analyzed, had contributed to their understanding of how the American pilot could be trapped and destroyed. The irony was not lost on him that the pilot's greatest tactical strengths, her aggressive commitment to rescuing American personnel, and her consistent tactical excellence, were the very characteristics that would lead her into his carefully prepared ambush. In less than 6 hours, the laughing ghost who had haunted his forces for months would finally be silenced forever. Hassan raised his binoculars and took one final survey of his kill zone, satisfied that every element was perfectly positioned for the decisive engagement that would demonstrate Taliban tactical superiority over American technological advantage. The piercing wail of the emergency klaxon shattered the pre-dawn calm at Forward Operating Base Chapman like a sledgehammer through glass. Captain Sarah Martinez bolted upright in her narrow bunk, instantly alert despite having been asleep for only 3 hours after her previous night mission. The klaxon's distinctive pattern indicated an immediate scramble order. American forces were in contact and needed air support now. All available aviation assets, report to operations immediately. We have troops in heavy contact with urgent medevac requirements. The base public address system crackled with the urgency that every soldier recognized as the difference between life and death for their comrades in the field. Sarah was already pulling on her flight suit before the announcement finished, her movements automatic after months of emergency scrambles. Through the thin walls of her quarters, she could hear other pilots and crew members responding to the same urgent call, boots pounding on wooden walkways as the base transformed from sleepy morning routine to combat operations in seconds. The operations center was blazing with fluorescent lights when Sarah arrived, still sealing the Velcro closures on her survival vest. Major Chun stood at the tactical display, her face grim as she coordinated multiple information streams flowing in from various intelligence sources throughout the province. "Phoenix, thank God you're here," Chun called out, gesturing toward a large-scale map of the Kunar province projected on the main briefing screen. "We've got Convoy Bravo 6 under heavy attack in Dead Man's Canyon. Multiple casualties, including at least 3 urgent surgical cases that need immediate evacuation." Sarah studied the tactical display, her experienced eyes immediately recognizing the location as one of the most dangerous pieces of terrain in their operational area. Dead Man's Canyon had earned its ominous nickname through years of ambushes and IED attacks that had claimed dozens of American lives. The narrow valley offered limited maneuvering room for aircraft, while providing numerous concealed positions for enemy forces. "What's the tactical situation?" Sarah asked, already running through mental calculations of flight time, fuel requirements, and weapon loads necessary for the mission. Convoy departed Firebase Alpha at 0545 hours for a routine supply run to Outpost Charlie. Chun explained, pointing to the projected route on the tactical display. At approximately 0627 hours, they reported taking effective fire from multiple positions along the canyon walls. Initial reports indicate at least 15 enemy fighters with small arms, RPGs, and possible anti-aircraft weapons. Sarah felt the familiar pre-mission adrenaline beginning to course through her system as she absorbed the tactical intelligence. The timeline seemed rushed. Most Taliban ambushes were more carefully coordinated, with enemy forces taking time to position themselves optimally before initiating contact. The quick escalation suggested either exceptional Taliban coordination or desperation, driven by some unknown factor. "Where's my wingman?" Sarah asked, looking around the operations center for Captain Torres. "Razor's bird is down for maintenance. Transmission problems that grounded him yesterday evening." "You'll be going in solo on this one," Chun replied, her voice carrying the reluctance that every operations officer felt when sending aircraft into contested airspace without backup. Sarah nodded grimly, understanding the implications. Solo Apache operations in heavily contested areas violated standard operating procedures, but American soldiers were dying while bureaucrats worried about regulations. "What's the weather situation?" "In the target area? Clear skies, visibility unlimited, winds from the northwest at 8 knots. Perfect flying conditions, which means perfect shooting conditions for anyone with surface-to-air missiles," Chun answered, pulling up meteorological data on a secondary display. As Sarah reviewed the mission parameters, a nagging sense of unease began building in the back of her mind. The tactical situation felt too clean, too convenient, too much like a textbook scenario designed to trigger an immediate American response. After months of increasingly sophisticated Taliban intelligence operations, her instincts were screaming warnings that something wasn't right about this mission. "Major, what's our intelligence assessment of enemy capabilities in the target area?" Sarah asked, studying the canyon's topography with growing concern. Chun pulled up classified intelligence summaries that painted a disturbing picture of recent enemy activity. Significant increase in Taliban presence over the past week. Signal intercepts suggest they've been pre-positioning weapons and personnel throughout the canyon system. Our assessment is that they're preparing for a major operation, possibly targeting our supply routes. The pieces of the tactical puzzle were beginning to form an ominous picture in Sarah's mind. The timing was too perfect, the location too advantageous for enemy forces, and the tactical situation too compelling for American forces to ignore. Every instinct developed through months of combat operations was telling her that she was about to fly into a carefully prepared trap. "Phoenix, time is critical here," Chun continued, glancing at the digital mission clock that showed elapsed time since the initial distress call. "Those wounded soldiers need evacuation within the next 20 minutes, or we're going to lose them." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, fighting the internal battle between tactical caution and the moral imperative to rescue American soldiers under fire. The helicopter pilot's oath demanded that she risk everything to save the lives of ground troops, but her professional training warned against flying predictable missions into ideal ambush terrain. "I need to see the exact coordinates and approach vectors," Sarah said, making the decision that would define the next hour of her life. "If I'm going in solo, I need every piece of intelligence we have about enemy positions and capabilities." As Chun provided the detailed tactical briefing, Sarah found herself analyzing not just the mission parameters, but the subtle inconsistencies that suggested this was more than a routine convoy ambush. The enemy response had been too quick, too coordinated, and too perfectly positioned to be anything other than a pre-planned operation. 10 minutes later, Sarah was strapping into her Apache's pilot seat, running through pre-flight checks with the mechanical precision that had kept her alive through dozens of combat missions. Warrant Officer Williams was already in the front gunner's position, his hands moving across weapon systems controls with practiced efficiency. "Bulldog, something doesn't feel right about this mission," Sarah said over the intercom as the Apache's twin turboshaft engines began their distinctive whine toward full power. "Roger that, Phoenix. My gut's been churning since we got the briefing." "This whole setup feels like someone's been reading our playbook," Williams replied, his Texas accent unable to disguise the concern in his voice. As the Apache lifted off from the base's helicopter pad, Sarah made a silent promise to herself and her crew. If this was indeed a trap, she would spring it on her own terms, while keeping every American soldier alive in the process. The Taliban might think they knew her tactical preferences, but they were about to discover that true professionals always had surprises waiting for overconfident enemies. 300 meters above Dead Man's Canyon, Taliban commander Malik Hassan pressed his military-grade headset against his ear with trembling fingers as the distinctive thump-thump-thump of Apache rotor blades echoed off the canyon walls. After months of meticulous planning and intelligence gathering, the moment of ultimate victory was finally at hand. Phoenix was flying directly into his perfectly orchestrated trap, following the exact flight path his analysis had predicted. "All units, Phoenix is approaching from bearing 045, altitude 150 meters, airspeed 120 knots, Hassan whispered into his tactical radio, watching through high-powered binoculars as the Apache helicopter appeared at the mouth of the canyon like a mechanical angel of death. SA-7 teams, prepare for engagement. RPG positions, stand ready for coordinated fire on my command." Below in the canyon, Hassan's carefully positioned fighters crouched behind rocks and camouflaged positions, their weapons trained on the narrow corridor of airspace where Phoenix would have to fly. The two surface-to-air missile systems had achieved solid radar locks, their operators' fingers poised over firing triggers that would send heat-seeking death racing toward the American helicopter at 3 times the speed of sound. Hassan's scarred face twisted into a predatory smile as he watched Phoenix's Apache bank into the canyon, following exactly the tactical approach his intelligence analysis had predicted. For months, this female pilot had haunted his forces like an avenging spirit, appearing from nowhere to devastate Taliban positions with surgical precision. 37 of his best fighters had died under her guns, each death carefully documented and analyzed to understand her tactical preferences. "Phoenix is maintaining standard approach vector," reported one of his spotters positioned on the opposite canyon wall. "She's flying the exact pattern we predicted. Northeast approach, descending to 100 meters altitude for optimal target engagement." Hassan felt the intoxicating rush of imminent victory as he monitored multiple radio frequencies simultaneously. American tactical communications indicated that Phoenix was responding to their false convoy attack exactly as planned, her moral compulsion to rescue wounded soldiers overriding any tactical caution she might have possessed. SA-7 Alpha, you have firing solution, Hassan commanded into his radio, watching as the Apache moved deeper into the kill zone with each passing second. SA-7 Bravo, confirm target lock and prepare for simultaneous engagement. The two missile operators confirmed their readiness, their Soviet-era surface-to-air systems tracking the Apache's heat signature with deadly precision. In 30 seconds, both missiles would launch simultaneously, creating an inescapable wall of destruction that would finally end Phoenix's reign of terror over Taliban forces. But as Hassan prepared to give the final firing command, something unexpected happened that would haunt his nightmares for the rest of his short life. Clear, confident, and utterly fearless, Phoenix's laughter suddenly erupted across every radio frequency in the canyon. The sound cut through static and interference like a silver blade, carrying a note of genuine amusement that seemed completely incongruous with the deadly situation unfolding in the valley below. It wasn't the nervous laughter of someone facing death, or the hysterical giggling of someone who had snapped under pressure. This was the laughter of someone who was genuinely entertained by her enemy's efforts. Hassan's blood turned to ice as the terrible implications of that laughter crashed over him like an avalanche. In that crystalline moment of understanding, he realized that Phoenix wasn't flying into a trap. She was springing one of her own. "You think you're so clever." Phoenix's voice followed her laughter across the tactical frequencies, speaking directly to her hidden enemies with casual confidence. "Did you really believe I didn't know about your little surveillance operation? That I couldn't hear you breathing on my radio frequencies for the past month?" Hassan's hands shook as he frantically adjusted his radio equipment, trying to understand how Phoenix could be transmitting on Taliban frequencies that should have been secure. The sophisticated encryption his communications specialist had assured him was unbreakable was apparently as transparent as glass to American intelligence capabilities. "Commander, we have multiple aircraft contacts at high altitude," screamed one of his lookouts, panic replacing the confident anticipation that had characterized their radio communications moments before. F-16s, at least 4 of them, diving toward our positions. High above the canyon, far beyond the range of Hassan's primitive air defense systems, a flight of F-16 Fighting Falcons had been circling in patient silence for over an hour. Their advanced radar systems had been methodically mapping every Taliban position, every weapon system, every communications node that Hassan had so carefully positioned throughout the canyon. Phoenix's laughter hadn't been a reaction to danger. It had been the signal for a coordinated counterattack that would demonstrate the lethal consequences of underestimating American tactical intelligence. "All SA-7 teams, fire immediately. Fire everything." Hassan screamed into his radio, desperate to salvage something from his collapsing operation. But his missile operators were already abandoning their positions, running for cover as precision guided. Munitions began raining from the sky like the judgment of an angry god. The first AGM-65 Maverick missile struck the eastern SA-7 position with devastating precision, vaporizing the launcher and its crew in a flash of orange flame that briefly turned the canyon walls into a hellscape of shadows and light. The second missile found the RPG team that had been positioned to provide backup anti-aircraft coverage, eliminating them before they could fire a single shot. Phoenix's Apache continued its approach through the canyon, completely untouched by the increasingly desperate Taliban fire that erupted from positions that were being systematically destroyed by the circling F-16s. Her laughter continued to echo across the radio frequencies, a sound that would become legendary among both American forces and the few Taliban fighters who survived the next 90 seconds. "This is Phoenix to all Taliban forces in Dead Man's Canyon." Her voice cut through the chaos with crystal clarity. "You've been studying me for months, learning my patterns, predicting my movements. But you made one critical mistake. You assumed I wasn't studying you right back." Hassan watched in horror as his carefully planned ambush transformed into a slaughter that would eliminate his entire operational network. The months of intelligence gathering, the sophisticated surveillance equipment, the professional tactical analysis, none of it had mattered, because the Americans had been feeding him information designed to lure his forces into this canyon for destruction. As precision-guided death continued to rain from the Afghan sky, Hassan realized that Phoenix's laughter would be the last sound many of his fighters would ever hear. The precision airstrikes transformed Dead Man's Canyon into a graveyard of twisted metal and pulverized stone in less than 90 seconds of devastating American firepower. What had moments before been Taliban commander Malik Hassan's masterpiece of tactical planning was now a smoking crater field littered with the destroyed remnants of surface-to-air missiles, RPG launchers, and communication equipment that represented months of careful preparation and resource allocation. Captain Sarah Phoenix Martinez banked her Apache helicopter through the dissipating smoke clouds, her thermal imaging systems revealing the complete destruction of every enemy position that had been painstakingly mapped by American intelligence over the past 6 weeks. The counter-ambush operation had been executed with surgical precision that would be studied in military academies for decades to come. "Phoenix, this is Hammer Flight Leader," crackled the voice of Major Tom Sledge Harrison, the F-16 flight commander whose precision-guided munitions had just eliminated an entire Taliban intelligence network. "Canyon is clear of all hostile forces." That was some of the most beautiful target coordination I've seen in 20 years of combat operations. Sarah's laughter, which had become the last sound Hassan's fighters heard before their destruction, continued to echo in her own mind as she surveyed the tactical masterpiece that had just unfolded below her. The operation represented months of careful, counterintelligence work that had turned the Taliban's own sophisticated surveillance network into the instrument of their destruction. "Outstanding work, Hammer Flight. Phoenix sends her compliments." "To the best precision strike team in the Air Force," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a chess master who had just executed a 20-move combination that her opponents never saw coming. The genesis of the counter-operation had begun 6 weeks earlier when Major Chun's intelligence analysis revealed the full scope of Taliban surveillance activities targeting Phoenix's missions, rather than simply changing Sarah's tactical patterns. To avoid the trap, American intelligence officers had crafted an elaborate deception designed to exploit the enemy's intelligence gathering against them. "Phoenix, this is Overwatch," came Major Chun's voice over the secure tactical frequency, transmitted from the Intelligence Operations Center at Forward Operating Base Chapman. "We're receiving battle damage assessment from multiple sensors. Preliminary count shows complete elimination of primary targets. Alpha through Hotel. The intelligence network that's been tracking your operations has been effectively neutralized." Sarah executed a slow orbit of the canyon, her experienced eyes cataloging the destruction that marked the end of the most sophisticated Taliban intelligence operation ever mounted against American aviation assets. The false convoy that had served as bait for Hassan's trap was already being recovered by American ground forces, the actors in this deadly theater having played their roles to perfection. The true brilliance of the counter-operation lay not in its tactical execution, but in its strategic deception. For weeks, American intelligence had been feeding carefully crafted false information through channels they knew were compromised, allowing Hassan to believe he was building an accurate tactical profile of Phoenix's operations while actually being led toward his own destruction. "Bulldog, run a final sensor sweep to confirm all hostile positions are neutralized," Sarah instructed her gunner, though both crew members already knew that nothing could have survived the coordinated F-16 strikes that had turned the canyon into a moonscape of overlapping crater patterns. "Roger that, Phoenix. Thermal shows no human signatures, no active electronics, and no intact weapon systems. This place is deader than my hometown on a Sunday morning," Williams replied in his distinctive Texas drawl, his voice carrying the professional satisfaction of a mission completed without American casualties. As Sarah's Apache climbed out of the canyon toward the clear Afghan sky above, she reflected on the psychological warfare dimension of the operation that had been as important as the kinetic destruction. The Taliban fighters who had survived the airstrikes would carry the story of Phoenix's laughter to every corner of the province, creating a legend that would undermine enemy morale for years to come. The sound of confident American laughter in the face of a perfect ambush would become a symbol of tactical superiority that transcended the immediate military significance of the operation. Taliban commanders throughout Afghanistan would hesitate before engaging American aviation assets, knowing that apparent vulnerability might conceal devastating counterattacks. "Phoenix, you are cleared for return to Chapman. Outstanding mission." "Execution," came the voice of the base operations controller, though the simple words couldn't capture the strategic significance of what had just occurred in the canyon below. 3 months later, Captain Sarah Martinez stood before a formation of Apache helicopter crews at Fort Rucker, Alabama, the Army's premier aviation training facility. The distinguished flying cross ribbon on her uniform represented recognition for the Dead Man's Canyon operation, but her real legacy was being written in the faces of young pilots who hung on every word of her tactical briefings. The most important lesson from Afghanistan, Sarah told the assembled student pilots, her voice carrying the authority earned through combat against a sophisticated enemy, is that predictability in battle is death, but apparent predictability can be a weapon when used deliberately against overconfident opponents. The classroom was silent except for the scratch of pens on paper as future combat pilots absorbed tactical wisdom paid for in blood and validated by victory. Sarah's story had become required reading at the Army Aviation School. Her laughter in Dead Man's Canyon transformed into a case study of psychological warfare and tactical deception. Your enemies will study you, learn your patterns, and attempt to exploit your habits, Sarah continued, looking directly at the young faces that reminded her of her own pre-deployment enthusiasm years earlier. But remember that intelligence warfare is a two-way street. While they're watching you, you can be watching them right back. Years later, Apache pilots deploying to combat zones around the world would carry with them the legacy of phoenixes. Laughter, the understanding that sometimes the best response to a perfect trap is to spring it on your own terms while maintaining your sense of humor in the face of those who underestimate the ingenuity of American warriors. The Taliban had set their trap for the Apache pilot, but in the end, they discovered that the phoenix always rises from the ashes of her enemy's ambitions, reborn stronger and more dangerous than ever before. Her laughter had become the sound of American defiance in the face of any enemy foolish enough to believe that superior tactics could overcome superior warriors fighting for a righteous cause.